Hello, everyone. Hello, Mike.
Oh,
I'm very glad. I'm
hello.
very glad to welcome you all. My name is Vlad Bagnuk. I'm a community marketing manager at Developer Shore. Follow us on social media networks to follow our job opportunities, activities, and future webinars. Also, a recording of this webinar will be available there. Links to our social media accounts you can easily find in your email. And now I give the floor to the speaker of our webinar, Mike Harris.
All right. Hello there. Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen so that should help. And I'll show you my slides. Great. Well, hello there. My name is Mike Harris, and I'm going to be speaking to you about how does Demings work on quality help us. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak. I'll speak for about 30 minutes and then answer questions. I'm currently the solo tester at Geckoboard, and we aim to give every person and every organisation access to relevant and understandable data so that they can make better decisions. And we do this by enabling people to make dashboards, such as the one on this slide, and helping them to share those dashboards. I'm also the Programme Secretary of the British Computer Society's Specialist Interest Group in Software Testing. I'm going to talk about W. Edwards Deming. Probably most of your C-suite know Deming. I can guarantee that all of the agile coaches you work with will know all about Deming. And I think developers should know about Deming too, because if we know about Deming, we get a better understanding of lean and agile, we have a better understanding of quality, and this is going to help us develop software, and it will help us if we want to go into management. I became interested in Deming when I started to work in lean and agile teams, because I wanted to learn what lean and agile were and where the ideas came from. And I found that when I read books about lean and agile, I found that they nearly all mentioned Deming. And when I came across his work on quality too, I really came to feel that developers would benefit from knowing about his work. But before I continue, I'd just like to give a quick background by having one slide on lean and one slide on agile. When I looked at what lean is, I discovered that lean is an American description of Japanese production systems. And this description comes from a study done by MIT. And of primary interest in the study is the Toyota production system. And the phrase lean actually comes from a dissertation of an MIT researcher who said that Japanese production systems are lean because they do more than mass manufacturing with less. Also coming out of this study is the book, The Machine That Changed the World, which is an analytical history of car manufacturing. Starting before the study, continuing through the time study and finishing afterwards, Mary Poppendike was working out how to take the principles of the Toyota production system and apply them to lean to software development. And she and her husband Tom published a book, Lean Software Development and Agile Toolkit, which is where we get the phrase lean software development from. When I had a look at Agile, I found that Agile was quite different. The history is quite different. If you think of Agile being an iterative and incremental engineering methodology, you can say that it started in the 1930s with Bell telephones using the Schuhart cycle. And I'll say more about that later on. But if you move forward to the 1950s, independently of Bell telephones, IBM had their own software development team that was working in an iterative way. One of the programmers on the team was Jerry Weinberg. He said it felt very natural. And the leader of the team was a friend of von Neumann, and he just thought this is how von Neumann saw software development. At the same time as this was happening, and again independently, America was developing the X-15 jet plane. And they did so with incremental engineering. The project was regarded as a success. If you've seen the film First Man about Neil Armstrong, this is the jet plane he's flying at the beginning of the film when he's bouncing around the outside of the Earth's atmosphere. So the engineers went from the X-15, went on to work for NASA in the 1960s, and they persuaded NASA engineers to work in an iterative way, and they persuaded NASA software engineers to work in an iterative way. And in the early 1960s, on Project Mercury, NASA engineers were using iterations, time boxing, and they wrote their tests before they wrote their code. And in fact, you can see the whole of the NASA program to put an astronaut on the moon as being iterative and incremental, because Project Mercury put 1 astronaut into space. The next rocket, Project Gemini, put 2 rockets into space. And the rocket after that, Apollo, put 3 astronauts into space. And once they'd got 3 astronauts into space, they then put the astronauts into space with a lunar module. They put the astronauts into space with a lunar module, went round the moon, and then they went and landed on the moon with a lunar module. If you move forward from there to 1995, this is when Schwaber and Sutherland first presented Scrum at a conference. Scrum is now the most widely used lean methodology. And if you move forward from there, you get to 2001 when the Agile Manifesto was written. I found it very interesting that so much work was done on Agile before the Agile Manifesto was actually written. But then why talk about Deming? I should say I've brightened up my slide with pictures of Toyota cars, as Toyota is of primary interest in the study of lean. Well, Deming believed quality is central to success, and he worked with Japanese industry immediately after World War II, when Japan had a negative net worth, and he helped it to grow to be a global success. And at that time, Japan not only had a negative net worth, it also had no coal, no oil, no gas. At that time, it had no timber, and it had a reputation for shoddy goods. And this was immediately after World War II. And I've read that 70% of Japan's ports and 40% of Japan's cities have been destroyed. And Deming helped turn that round to be a great success. I also looked for a quote which shows his importance as a management scientist. And I found this quote from David Anderson. He said, Deming is occasionally mentioned as perhaps the most important management scientist of the 20th century. And in my opinion, that's greatly deserved. Deming's ideas have influenced both Agile and Lean, and he's still widely referred to. This is a book that I got out of the Geckoboard library. You may have read it too. It's the book that's popularizing the theory of jobs to be done, and it mentions Deming all the way through it. As I say, your C-suite and Agile coaches will know Deming, and I think we should too. If I'm going to talk about Deming and quality, we should start off, I think, by saying, what did Deming say quality is? Well, Deming said quality can only be defined in terms of the agent. And to illustrate what he meant by this, I could talk about a book. The first agent in a book is the writer. So for a writer, quality would be, did they manage to write in the prose style that they wanted? Have they managed to tell the story that they wanted? And have they managed to get their points across? Another agent for a book would be the printer. And for the printer, quality would be something like, is the ink good quality? Is the paper of good quality? And how long is the print run? Another agent for a book would be the publisher. For the publisher, quality could simply be, how many books did they sell? And of course, another agent for the book is the reader. And for the reader, quality would be, was it a good read? Was it an exciting story? Was there some spark of knowledge? I find this definition very useful because it helps me understand different perspectives on quality within my team and different perspectives on quality from within our customers. But Deming believed that customers didn't always know what they wanted. He said a customer can seldom say today what product or service would be desirable 3 years from now. And I was thinking about that in terms of where we are today, because perhaps the greatest quote on this would be Henry Ford saying that people didn't want a motor car. What he'd have asked them, what they'd have said, would they have wanted a faster horse? But he, of course, gave them a motor car. And I think for us today, we're in a similar situation with AI, because customers aren't asking for new features that are driven by AI. But maybe in 3 years' time, they will expect them. Deming said quality is important because it improves productivity. And he went beyond that. He says if you improve quality, there's a chain reaction, because improved quality also improves productivity. Because it improves productivity, it lowers costs, and therefore it helps the company capture the market. And he gives an example of this of when he visited a Japanese factory. When he visited the Japanese factory, he found that they had a number of production lines. And at the end of each production line, there was an inspector. And the inspector's role was to check whether or not goods coming off the production line were at a good enough standard to go to the customer. And if they weren't good enough quality, they went to another production line called rework, where they would be reworked and again inspected again. Now, when Deming saw this, he asked the factory manager what proportion of his staff worked on the rework production line. And the factory manager said it was 21% of his staff. Well, Deming's next question was, well, if 21% of your staff are working on the rework production line, reworking substandard products, would it be fair to assume that another 21% of your staff are working on the production line making those substandard products? And the factory manager said yes. So the factory had nearly half of its staff either making or fixing substandard products. Deming's solution to this was, instead of trying to inspect quality in at the end of the production line, they should be trying to build quality in by having operational definitions of what's required at each stage of production. Deming said the company followed his advice and they were able to improve quality and therefore improve their productivity. I rather like the story because it reminds me of the first development team I worked in, where the developers worked at that end of the office and the testers worked at this end of the office, and we were discouraged from talking to each other because it wasted each other's time. The testers only tested code that had been finished, and if we found a bug, the developers had to stop what they were doing, fix it so that we could carry on with our testing. And in that environment, it was very hard to produce good quality work. And it's quite different how we work today at Geckoboard, where we're trying to build quality in rather than trying to test it in at the end of the process, which we were in that early development team. But then what are these operational definitions that are so powerful? Deming says an operational definition puts communicable meaning into a concept. Adjectives like good or reliable have no meaning until they're expressed in terms of sampling, test, and criterion. I think this is really useful, and I always have it at the back of my mind when I go to planning meetings. I think we've probably all been to a planning meeting where at some point we've been told we're going to make something that's better, faster, more reliable. But actually, what do those adjectives mean? What we actually need to do is express these things, as Deming said, in terms of test and criterion, so we can know what they mean. So I think this is really very useful. Now I'm going to talk about the Deming cycle. And this is at the beginning of Agile, and it's what Deming is best known for. It's an incremental and iterative development methodology. In the 1930s, Walter Schuhart of Bell Labs started using Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles, and he encouraged engineering teams to do the same because he found when they did so, they produced better quality work. And Deming learned the cycle from Walter Schuhart. And when Deming gave his lectures in Japan in 1950, he presented what he called the Schuhart cycle. And Deming wrote about it under continual improvement of quality. Deming referred to Schuhart as the master, and in a footnote of his book, Out of the Crisis, Deming says what he presented in 1950 he called the Schuhart cycle, but it went into use as the Deming cycle. Now, this is what Deming presented in 1950. This is what he called the Schuhart cycle, and there are 4 parts to it, as you can see. The first part is the team needs to consider what is the most important accomplishments for the team. The second part is the team should carry out the change or test decided upon. And the third part, the team should observe the effects of the change or test. And the fourth part is the team should study the results and consider what did we learn. And the team should repeat this with the knowledge accumulated and move onward. This is how Deming described the Schuhart cycle. Schuhart originally had 3 points in a line and changed them to be 4 points in a cycle. Deming simplified the language, so the cycle becomes a plan, do, study, act cycle. The first part being plan, the team will plan what the team will do. Second part, the team will do, they will build and test. Third part is study, the team will consider what went wrong and what went right. And the fourth part is act, the team will change the way of working based on real results. If you look at the diagram on the slide, you can see all 4 parts of the cycle are represented within the circle. So all 4 parts are related to one another, and there is no hierarchy. The cycle is very much like a wheel that rolls forward. There is no beginning and there's no end, it just keeps rolling. Occasionally it's referred to as the Deming wheel. Deming spoke about it as a wheel which rolls along the line of concepts regarding product quality and a sense of responsibility of product quality. So each time a team goes through the cycle, they'll get a better understanding of product quality and a better understanding of their sense of responsibility for product quality. There's a few points I'd like to make about the Deming cycle. The reason to study is to learn how to improve tomorrow's product. Everyone can take part. Everyone has a chance to contribute ideas. Masaki Imai said that Japanese executives recast the Deming cycle into the plan-do-check-act cycle. What Deming said about this is the Deming cycle is a quality control program. It is a plan for management. You repeat the 4 steps over and over. Maybe you could say the Deming cycle is for management and the plan-do-check-act cycle is for a group of people that work on faults at a local level. The cycles continue to evolve due to work by people such as Karo Ishikawa. And I'd also say that the cycles continue to influence people in new ways. This is another book from the Geckoboard library, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. In this book, he has a cycle he calls Build, Measure, Learn. And you can see it's represented on the front of the book with a cycle that goes round. There are lots of articles on the web saying that this cycle is very heavily influenced by the Deming cycle. And I'd say it's another example of Deming's ideas influencing people today. One of the other books I read when I was learning about Lean and Agile was The Toyota Way. And in this book, Jeffrey Leica says that the Deming cycle embodies the learning system in the Toyota production system. Now, when I first read about the Deming cycle, it really sounded very familiar to me. And that's because I was working in a Scrum team. And when I read a book by Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-creators of Scrum, he said the Deming cycle is how Scrum product development is done. Jeff Sutherland says he uses the plan-do-check-act cycle to train people to do Scrum with paper aeroplanes. And he found that if teams go through the cycle 3 times, they get much better at making paper aeroplanes. This is as Deming predicted because the Deming cycle is about improving quality. Sutherland also said that sprint retrospectives are the check part of the plan-do-check-act cycle, and it's important to move the team onto the act part so the team makes improvements. I've also been reading recently a lot about Elon Musk's engineering ideas, and he talks a lot about using cycles too. So I think he will also have been influenced by the Deming cycle. So you can see the Deming cycle is part of Lean because it's part of Toyota production system, it's part of Agile because it's part of Scrum, and it's also about improving quality. I think the Deming cycle empowers us because if we work in a Lean or Agile team, we use a Deming cycle. And the Deming cycle is about continuous improvement of quality. And we can use retrospectives to raise issues that will help us improve quality. So we should feel empowered to improve quality. Now, the work that we do is done in a context. And Deming had, and that context is really just decided by management. And Deming had 14 key principles for managers. As I said earlier, I once worked in a team where developers and testers were not supposed to speak to each other. There, it was very hard to do quality work, and that was the context that we were in. The Deming's 14 points help address those issues. Deming said that these points were the basis for lessons to top management in Japan, and adoption of the points is a signal that management intend to stay in business, and that these 14 points apply anywhere to both small and large organizations. First point is that you need to create constancy of purpose for improving products and services. Best efforts are not sufficient. Principles are required. You need to know what business you're in. The problems of the future require consistency of purpose. Deming liked to tell the story that when he was a small child, when you went into town, you went in a horse-drawn buggy. And if you wanted to go faster, you cracked a buggy whip. But the horse-drawn buggy was soon replaced by a motor car, and the buggy whip manufacturers went out of business because they made buggy whips and nobody wanted them anymore. But Deming pointed out that a carburetor has a similar role in a car, and if carburetor manufacturers define themselves as carburetor manufacturers, they would eventually go out of business too. And with the start of electronic cars coming in, I've not heard about carburetor manufacturers going out of business. I think they must be defining themselves as something that helps vehicles to move faster. And I think within that, there's a lesson for us all. The whole world's gone through a massive change in the last few years with COVID. And it's quite likely that businesses that define themselves one way before COVID will now need to define themselves in a different way after COVID. And if you can create constancy of purpose, you can deal with those sorts of massive changes that we're going through. Another point that Jeffrey Leica made in the Toyota Way was that this point reminds him of Toyota and explains why they're successful in terms of sales and profits. Point 2 is adopt the new philosophy. Buying your product is not a privilege. Customers have choice and don't want to buy products or services that have defects. Point 3 is you need to cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality. If you think about the story I told from the Japanese factory, where they moved from inspecting quality in at the end of the production line to building quality in, this is the direction that we want to do. Doing rework is really expensive. Fixing bugs is really expensive. It's far better if we've got time to make new features than actually fixing bugs. So we want to be building quality in. Rework raises costs, so we want to avoid rework wherever we can. And today at Geckoboard, as I say, we're trying to build quality in rather than trying to inspect it in. We need to end the practice of awarding contracts on price alone and instead minimize total cost by working with a single supplier. Deming was talking about how manufacturers should build relationship with suppliers to work together to improve quality, instead of just cutting the price of suppliers. To me, this feels very much like working with software vendors. I had a friend who worked for a large company, which hired a vendor to write their corporate website. And the company was really pleased. They got a good price from the vendor, and so they'd really hit them hard and ground them down to get a really cheap price. But when my friend went and talked to the vendor's development team, he found that one of the ways that they had cut their price was, instead of using GitHub, they'd used a shareware alternative. And the shareware alternative didn't have PRs. And because it didn't have PRs, they didn't do code reviews. And we can only imagine the quality of the code that they were producing. So I think this point still has a lot of relevance today, and it shows the advantage of working with a single supplier to improve quality and cost rather than just trying to cut cost. Now, point 5 is you need to improve constantly and forever every process for planning, production, and service. And you want to do this because Deming says when you improve quality, there's this chain reaction that improves quality, improves productivity, which lowers costs and helps you capture the market. What we need to be doing is asking, is every job done better than it was done before? Point 6 is we need to institute training on the job. We need to learn about the company. We need training and retraining for the job. The greatest waste is the failure to use the abilities of people. An example would be an induction process, which doesn't help people, show people how to be successful in the company, and they then aren't successful and they either leave or they underperform. The company's most precious possession is the people who work for it. Companies need to invest in people as well as in equipment. Point 7 is we need to institute and adopt and institute leadership. Deming said that a manager is a coach and a counsel, not a judge. We need leadership, not management. Leading people is helping people to do a better job. Deming called management supervision, and this is a real put down. At that time, supervision was the lowest tier of managers. They weren't even called managers, they were called supervisors. So by calling management supervision, Deming is really putting it down. And he said supervision should be replaced by leadership. A leader tries to create for everybody interest and challenge and joy in work, and a leader teaches them cooperation, and a leader works by cooperation. Number 8, Deming said we should drive out fear from the workplace, because no one puts out their best performance unless they feel secure. Because if people are frightened at work, it'll prevent them from answering questions honestly, because they want to protect their job and protect their jobs from their friends. This sort of environment can also prevent people from asking challenging questions that need to be answered. As developers and testers, we need to be able to ask challenging questions and naive questions, because we need to be able to clarify things at an early stage. So I think this point is very important for us. Number 9, we need to break down barriers between staff areas, because if we do not understand each other's work, there will be a cost in terms of rework. We all work in cross-functional teams now with front-end developers, back-end developers, designers, testers, product owners, scrum masters. And if we don't really understand each other's work, we can easily create work for each other. For example, if back-enders create an API endpoint, and it's not clear how to use it, then it can create work for the front-end team. But also Deming's talking about collaboration across teams, because it'd be quite possible for a development team to produce a feature that's hard to use, say, which would create work for the customer service teams. So we need to understand each other, and we need teamwork throughout the company. Number 10 is we need to eliminate slogans, exhortations, and targets for the workforce. Slogans like "be a quality worker," "take pride in your work," well, these are directed at the wrong people. They advertise that management is unaware of the barriers to pride of workmanship. I know of a startup where it was bought out by a fund, and one of the first things the fund did was print out some slogans on pieces of cardboard and send them to the startup and instruct them to put one slogan up in each meeting room. The staff at the startup were not impressed, as you can imagine. Point 11 is you need to eliminate slogans for the quotas of workforce, and so you need to eliminate numerical quotas for the workforce and numerical goals for management. And that's because we will meet them whether or not they're useful. I read about an example on a car production line where there are parts made in America didn't always fit, parts made in Japan always fitted. The parts needed to be 500 millimeters long. And the American suppliers had said, well, we can have a tolerance of 5 millimeters either side. So their parts were made between 495 and 505 millimeters. And their parts met that target. But in Japan, they just tried to get better. And their parts were nearly 500 millimeters long. So their parts nearly always fitted. Companies should try to improve continuously and not hit targets, just like that Japanese supplier did. Point 12 is we should remove inhibitors to good work and eliminate the annual rating or merit systems. People problems are complex. For instance, how can you do good work if you don't know what's acceptable? And how can we do good work if we're made to feel like a commodity? We've all heard of the phrase body shopping. I would also say that challenging society's biases and prejudices fit here. Because, for example, if you work in a development team which has no women engineers, then in fact you're missing out on some fantastic engineers. Or if you work in an engineering team which has women engineers, but they don't feel valued or listened to, then in fact you're going to be missing out on part of their skill. So I do think that we need to challenge biases and prejudice because they are inhibitors to good work. Point 13, we need to institute a vigorous program of education and self-improvement for everyone. There are lots of good people, but we need self-improvement. People need more than money in their career. Education and helping people to live better is important. We need to keep people's minds developing. It does not need to relate to work. We need to be elevating people's minds. No organisation can survive with good people. It needs people who are improving. Deming worked with the Ford Motor Company, and they had a joint education program with the union, which included English and maths, which is fantastic, but it excluded basketball. Deming argued that it should include basketball too, because if you're playing a team sport like basketball, you learn to work as part of a team, which people would be doing as part of their work. And point 14 is you should put everybody in the company to work accomplishing this transformation. Deming says that management will struggle over every one of the 13 points and that the Deming cycle will be helpful to management in dealing with that because it would help them plan an initiative, carry out, and then assess whether or not it's been successful. And I think if we see managers fail with these 14 points, it helps us because it can depersonalize the issue and we can see that the issue is one of education. There's a nice video on the Deming Institute website, which illustrates how the 14 points all support one another. Each of the 14 points is implicit in all the others. The way not to depend on mass inspection, point 3, is to continually improve the process, point 5. To do that, you need quality supplies, point 4. And in finding a quality supplier, remember constancy of purpose, point 1. The 14 points are all one philosophy. I think these 14 points help us because this is a theory of management for the improvement of quality, productivity, and competitive position. That's something that I would want. These points provide support for creating a successful work environment. I wouldn't want to work anywhere that was very different to these 14 points. And Deming said that management will struggle with them. And we will see when management struggle with them, we see that struggle. And as I said, it helps us depersonalize this struggle. I think these points should also make us feel confident because if we work somewhere where we're frightened to ask questions, then we know it's not our failure, it's a failure of management. And overall, I would say that Deming's work helps us because it gives us a better understanding of quality. It helps us understand continuous improvement of quality. It helps us understand building quality in, and it gives us this theory of management for the improvement of quality, productivity, and competitive position. This slide contains the references from the books that I've used in this talk. And I'd like to finish with a final quote from Deming, where he says, "We are here to learn, make a difference and have fun." I'd like to say thank you very much. And if you've got any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. So thank you.
Hi, Mike. I'd like to thank you about the great presentation that you just give us a joy to listen to. I have a question. It's really interesting. One of the points to the managers about the slogans that we should kind of eliminate. So could you a little bit elaborate on that? What it connects to the slogans, or I don't know, is it goes with mottos or some other stuff that usually people use in their workplaces, like dream big or go home. So yeah, can you elaborate on that, please?
I've worked in places where we've had slogans up on the wall: "Customer is king," and asking people to work well. And perhaps today we're not working in offices, so we don't see those slogans on the wall. But actually, they can still persist in company wikis and company communications. There was a guy at the same time as Deming called Crosby, and part of his philosophy is that you should be putting these slogans up in various places to encourage people to work harder. And what Deming is actually saying, that the responsibility for quality, in fact, rests far more with management than it actually does with the workforce. Because if the management has created a poor environment, that's perhaps by saying that the workers are responsible for quality rather than the management, then in fact the workers can't improve, the workforce, the developers, the testers can't improve quality because they're being held back in some way by management. So he's really pointing out, when he says the slogans are pointing at the wrong people, they should be pointing at management, because management needs to be improving their knowledge, improving their practices, asking this question: is every job being done better than it was before? Rather than actually saying to developers, say, why are there so many bugs in your code, and blaming the developer. That perhaps should be a blameless discussion where you can find out what the underlying causes are and start to deal with those, rather than actually sort of saying, everybody, you need to improve your work. Well, actually, the responsibility, say, really lies with management. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks so much. That explains. So as understood, if the slogan is correspond to the certain group, it might stay if it's been shared by every member of this group. Let's say for a developer team, so we know that they are like hardworking and they share this value with all of the teams. So we might left that slogan, having on the wall, or am I get you right?
I would say it's not just for all the developers. I would say the important thing is actually the managers and the C-suite where we're working. And he's saying the responsibility for quality particularly rests with them. So actually just saying to the developers, well, you've got to put less bugs in your code, and that doesn't really help. But if say if management looked at those issues of quality and then said, oh, we need to find out why we've got so many bugs, and we need to help the developers have a better process, better equipment, so that they can produce better quality software, that would be far better than putting any slogans up. So he's actually saying, don't put slogans up. He's actually saying that, in fact, the responsibility doesn't that lies so much with the developers and testers who perhaps don't have so much control over their system. We don't define the product backlog, whereas actually management can sit there and say, oh, we want to spend some time improving continuous integration system. I'm going to put that to the top of the product backlog, and that continuous integration system, say, could help you produce better quality work. So the responsibility is laying far higher with management rather than actually with, say, the developers and testers. We have our own responsibilities, but he's actually pointing out that if management just say, you need to produce better quality work, for instance, you need to produce code with less bugs in it, well, it's not terribly helpful. It's not going to help the company improve. And I've heard it said a number of times when bugs have gone out, why didn't the tester find that bug? Probably you've heard it as well. And actually, I think it's the wrong question. The question is why there's so many bugs, and what can we do about it? And that's a question for the team. But actually, it's much more important that the management enables the team to have those discussions and enables a continuous improvement so that the team can reduce the number of bugs. Am I being clear?
Yeah, 100%. So thanks so much. It means that kind of encouraging of managers to be more compassion about the issues that they face, instead of being some, using some slogans to in order to avoid these issues to appear. So yeah, and offer the solution, of course, to improve it all the time. So yeah, I guess yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
I have one question about 8 principal drive at fear. Questions about tracking systems, like tracking apps with a screenshot, to I know, to control work.
Right.
Is it useful or useless? Or I know, maybe we don't need to do.
Do you mean a tracking tool, something like Jira, which you would use?
No, I know that there are a lot of companies that use tracking systems to their employees.
All right.
To control their work.
All right. Okay. Well, I would say that trust is really important where you work. And I think that actually, if you haven't got trust, you're going to find it really very hard to do good quality work. And maybe if a company is tracking what people are doing every hour of the day, then in fact they're lacking that trust. And I think you'll find it very hard to get good quality work. Deming's point about drive out fear, I think fits in there, because if you're working in a system where you're tracked in that way, you must feel that actually I've got to do this today, and I've got to be seen to do it, and I've got to be seen to do it in these hours, and that's going to inhibit you, and I think that's going to damage the quality that's being produced, and I think that's so. I would say that trust is far more important. I think you can achieve far more with trust. And if the online world, I think, is moving far more to viewing people's work in terms of results, rather than how many hours you've done or how many boxes you've ticked. I organised an event with Mary and Tom Poppendike earlier in the year, and Tom Poppendike talked about how work today is very much like open source projects were some years ago, in that actually it was about what you contributed. Not whether you contributed it between 9 and 5 or on a Monday, or what you contributed at the time that suited you. And there would be an element of trust around that as well. So I think trust is really important. So I don't think that these tracking systems are useful in that way. I think it'd be far more useful to have trust and work together with your employees.
So can we say that it's like a bad sign for a company?
I don't think I would be comfortable working for somewhere like that. As I say, I'd like somewhere that's like these 14 points. And if you look at the tracking system, I think it contradicts with point 8. But Deming says management will struggle over every one of these 13 points. And I think what you've illustrated there is they've seen that. These are really old. I've taken these from a book that was published in 1982. And I read that he first presented them at a conference in Japan in 1978. So this is really well-established management good practice. And it's interesting how many different ways people are still struggling with them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I think this is all.
Okay.
So thank you, Mike, for the webinar. It was very interesting topic in general and also for me personally.
Okay. No, well, thank you very much. It's been very nice to meet you all, and I wish you all the best with everything.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Okay, thank you.